Kia ora, ko Ella Henry tēnei. This presentation relates to the pathway forward for our Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa Trust Board to settle our treaty claim Y116. The presentation provides a summary of the information that is in the handbook, which you will have been given when you arrived at this hui. It's also available from our Trust Board office in Kaitaia, or if you have access to the internet, you can download it from our website or our Facebook page. Also, we have in the presentation and in the handbook information about our administrative team in Kaitaia, our contact phone numbers, our email address, website, Facebook and YouTube channel. The handbook begins with a brief history of the claim and relates to how Y116 was lodged with the Waitangi Tribunal in 1985 on behalf of Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa by Peter Pāngari, with the help of Richard Hawke, who's been our lawyer ever since. The claim was researched over the next 8 years and was heard at the same time as the Muri Whenua hearings in 1993. In 1997, the Waitangi Tribunal issued a report for Muri Whenua and included findings for Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa. And one of the key things that they found at that time was that the return of Stony Creek Farm alone would not be sufficient to compensate for all of the losses that Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa have suffered, or to provide a sufficient economic base for the future of the iwi. The handbook then goes on to discuss the origins of the Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa Trust. The Trust began as a steering committee in 1987. In 1998, the Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa Trust was formed as a Māori trust. Then in 2003, after an AGM with the iwi, it was decided to rename the trust to reflect our tupuna, our ancestress, Kahukura Ariki. So the legal name for the Kahukura Ariki Trust Board exists, but it still continues to operate under its original name of Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa Trust. In 2004, the trust was given the mandate by the people to settle the claim and began negotiating with the Crown. And this has culminated in the signing of the agreement in principle, which includes the offer from the Crown, and that was signed in December of 2007. A post-settlement advisory group was set up to advise the Trust Board on progress towards settlement. In 2011, the first post-settlement governance entity subcommittee, as it was known then, was created, and that group comprised of Carol Bergen, Norm McKenzie, Richard Hawke and Peter Pāngari. The group was dissolved when the chair, Steve McKenzie, resigned from the trust and David Manuel became the chair in 2012. After that, a post-settlement advisory group with a much more specific brief was appointed to further progress the claim. That group comprised of myself, Ella Henry from Waimahana, and Sandra Heihei from Taimaro. Unfortunately, Sandra has had to retire because of personal whānau reasons, and I'm not able to be at this hui because of work commitments. Aroha mai. An important element of the treaty settlement process is the treaty settlement package. That is the final outcome of negotiations with the Crown. The treaty settlement package comprises of three components: the historical component, the cultural component and the financial redress. The historical redress is based on an agreed historical account of the grievances. In other words, the Crown acknowledges and agrees with the iwi that a grievance has occurred and formally apologises. The cultural redress includes vesting of sites, statutory recognitions, protocols, traditional place names being recognised, and financial redress is all commercial assets that are going to be returned to the iwi and any other forms of financial redress. The negotiation process is a long and involved series of activities, all of which have to be agreed to by the Crown before an iwi or a treaty settlement process progresses to the next stage. For example, the first and most important part of the negotiation process is that a legal entity is formed, and that legal entity receives a mandate from a significant majority of the iwi. Then, after the mandate has been confirmed and recognised by the Crown and the legal entity begin negotiations about the terms of negotiation. In other words, how they will meet, when they will meet, and what conditions, and how they will behave towards each other. This process is followed by the actual negotiations. At the end of the negotiations, the Crown makes an offer to the iwi and an agreement in principle is reached, whereby the iwi agrees to take that offer back to their people to engage in a discussion and consultation with their iwi about whether or not that is an acceptable offer. Sometimes there may need to be further negotiations until the Crown and iwi agree on a final offer, which is included in a deed of settlement that is signed off by the Crown and the people. At that stage, the mandated body then has to go back to the iwi and seek formal and legal ratification that that offer is acceptable by the people. If it is accepted by a majority of the people, then the Crown engages in developing legislation so that each of the items in the offer is entrenched in law, and finally that legislation is implemented and any redress is given back to the iwi. Once the deed of settlement has been signed, then the iwi are required to go out to every member of the iwi that they have registered on a database and ask the iwi to ratify not only the offer that's been made by the Crown, in other words, that to vote whether they agree or disagree with it, but also to vote on the kind of organisation that will manage the asset after settlement. So ratification involves the members of the iwi who are registered in the database voting to accept or reject the offer outlined in the deed of settlement. The post-settlement governance entity is a body that is set up after the deed of settlement has been signed, and it will receive the treaty settlement assets. The iwi who are registered, or iwi members who are registered, must vote not only to accept the deed of settlement, but also to accept or reject the post-settlement governance entity. The Trust Board is currently seeking feedback about a range of options that they might like to consider for a post-settlement governance entity, and we are engaging in that discussion as well as a discussion about the agreement in principle as part of these consultation hui. The agreement in principle is the offer that was made by the Crown in the document that was signed in December 2007. It incorporates the historical account of the grievances, the cultural redress that is being offered by the Crown, and any financial and commercial redress. The agreement in principle outlines the tribal boundaries for Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa, from the Whangaroa Harbour up beyond Whangaroa Peninsula, around to Taupo Bay, over to Waimahana, Taimaro, around to Hihi Waiawa, up the Oruaiti River to Otangaroa, back to Waihapa Bay and around into Whangaroa. Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa rohe covers from Taimaro westward to Te Whātū, to Waiawa, Hihi, Pai Whenua Motu, up the Oruaiti River to Otangaroa, Maunga Taratara to Waihapa Bay, then along the shoreline of Whangaroa Harbour to Tōtara North, around to Taupo Bay, Motu Kahakaha, Waimahana and back to Taimaro. This incorporates marae in Taimaro, Waimahana, Taupo Bay, Otangaroa, Waihapa and Mangatōwai. It also includes the marae at Waitaruke, which is technically outside the rohe. The land mass is approximately 50,000 acres, of which less than 5% currently remain in Māori land ownership. As previously stated, there are three types of redress included in the agreement in principle. The first part that is articulated is the historical account, which is a brief summary of the key points which the Crown has to address, which prove that they did not do enough to protect the interests and lands of Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa. In particular, the handbook refers to the recognition that two chiefs of other iwi, Nōpera Panakareao and Pororua Whare Kauri, who were in dispute over their lands pre-1840, actually sold off large chunks of our land prior to the signing of the treaty. The Crown sought to settle the dispute by acquiring the interests of both of those chiefs, but when they came up in 1841 to hold a land court in the area, at which our own tupuna from Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa had turned up to to complain about the land sales, there was no land court, and for many decades after that 1841 and 1843 hearing, when we presented an argument to the Crown that our lands had been sold illegally, the Crown did not pay attention to our requests, and that is the basis of the grievance and the reason why we lost most of our land.
As long as they get the gist of
The agreement in principle and the deed of settlement outline the financial and cultural redress. The financial redress comprises primarily of the Stony Creek assets, which will be vested in fee simple estate, which means that it will be given back in its entirety to the post-settlement governance entity on the settlement date. Also included in cultural redress is the Thompson and Clark blocks. They are being returned as other redress. They are both subject to an archaeological covenant because there are so many sacred sites that have been catalogued by archaeological studies conducted on those properties. This means they cannot be sold or farmed, but they can be used by the iwi for cultural purposes. Stony Creek and other assets are being returned to the iwi in their entirety. The Stony Creek station comprises of 2,275 hectares, more or less, and this slide shows the different land sections that are included in the Stony Creek station asset. The Thompson block and Clark block between them are about 800 hectares, and they are subject to an archaeological covenant to protect the registered archaeological sites. The Stony Creek redress also includes plant and stock, 11,500 units of stock and plant as it existed in November of 2007. These assets in total include approximately 3,000 hectares of land, 11,500 stock and plant and accommodation in excess of $1 million. There is not, however, any other financial redress included in the agreement in principle. Other types of redress included in the agreement in principle include protocols covering relationships between iwi and other entities, including local government and the Departments of Conservation, Ministry of Fisheries, etc. There is also wahi tapu, which is sacred lands that will be vested in the iwi because of their spiritual and cultural significance. This covers approximately 218 hectares, including 135 hectares on the Kōwhairoa Peninsula, or the Ranfurly Reserve as it is currently known. Wahi tapu lands that are currently in the DOC Conservancy or Department of Conservation will be co-managed in a joint advisory committee with representation from the iwi and DOC. This incorporates approximately 400 hectares of land on Kōwhairoa Peninsula and on the Ngatikahu block. Other types of redress include statutory acknowledgements and deeds of recognition of the mana whenua of Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa over our lands. One example of redress is that traditional names will be acknowledged and changed. For example, Bergen Point will become known as Te Whatu. Paikodi will have the correct spelling. Akatere will become known as Akatarere, its traditional name. Stony Creek will revert to Waikohatu, and Ranfurly Bay will revert to Tata. To summarise the agreement in principle, the total rohe of our land is 50,000 acres. This total amount of land was lost or sold since 1840, some 47,000 acres, approximately 95% of our lands. In the treaty settlement, some 7,500 acres of farmland, plus another 600 acres of smaller holdings, will be returned. That is, over 8,000 acres will be back in Māori land ownership. When combined with current Māori land holdings, our iwi will own 20% of our lands instead of less than 5%. The land that's being returned to the iwi, which is bound by archaeological and cultural covenants, is acknowledged as our land, and we have 30 years to develop strategies and programs for the use of the land before we take full possession of those lands, after which we will be liable for rates and other costs associated with land ownership. Statutory recognition of our mana whenua through joint management of other lands, recognition of our traditional names, and acknowledgement of our boundaries are other forms of redress that are included in the agreement in principle. that briefly summarises the agreement in principle, which is still a living document and can be adapted and amended with further negotiations, which the Crown has agreed to embark in, particularly since meeting with the Minister of Treaty Settlements on September the 13th. So, the agreement in principle is a starting point. It is not the final offer from the Crown. One other area that the iwi has to consult with our people over is what kind of organisation will manage the assets after settlement. That is known as the post-settlement governance entity, and the Trust Board has to look at a range of options when setting up that PSGE. The Crown requires that a PSGE is a legal entity. They will not allow an iwi to receive and manage settlements unless they set up a legal body. That legal body has to be developed by the mandated group, and it has to be ratified by all those iwi who are registered on the database for the tribe. The Crown will then assess the proposed post-settlement governance entity to ensure that it is representative, accountable, and has transparent processes. In 2011, the Ngatikahu Whangaroa Trust Board received advice from an organisation called the Tuia Group, who are based in Wellington, and they are experts on supporting and advising iwi in post-settlement. They conducted a research project and advised the Ngatikahu Whangaroa Trust Board on the range of post-settlement governance entity examples that other iwi have adopted. For example, Ngatikahu set up a statutory body as part of its deed of settlement, and they created the Charter for Te Runanga o Ngatikahu in 1996. Waikato Tainui set up an organisation called Te Kauhanganui Incorporated in 1999 as a charitable trust, and Te Runanga o Ngati Mutunga was set up in 2004 as a private trust. Now, since 1999, the Government and the Office of Treaty Settlements have concluded that they will not settle any more treaty claims to a charitable trust, because a charitable trust is set up to achieve charitable ends, and they want to make sure that a post-settlement governance entity is set up with much more specific aims. So they require iwi to set up incorporated societies or private trusts or statutory trusts. So one of the decisions that the iwi are going to ask all of our people about is whether or not you would prefer to have a statutory body, a private trust or a private company. The iwi need to decide which option you prefer, and you then notify the Trust Board through the mail out that will be coming out to you after these consultation hui have occurred. Another matter that members of the tribe need to clarify for the Trust Board is how we will have a say in choosing the representatives on the governance entity. And there are a number of options. For example, representatives might be chosen at the marae or hapu level. The current model draws 2 representatives from each of the 7 marae. So the post-settlement governance entity might look the same as the current one, with marae or hapu choosing representatives to sit on the post-settlement governance entity. Another alternative is that the people might want to nominate individual members who are voted on by all iwi members regardless of their marae or hapu affiliation. A third option is that representatives might be appointed by the Trust Board based on publicly notified selection processes, as in a job application. Now, some combination of the above, 1 representative from each marae, 1 or more representatives from an iwi-wide vote, and 1 or more representatives appointed for their expertise, is one possibility that you, the iwi, might choose to advise the Ngatikahu Whangaroa Trust Board on in terms of PSGE representation. Whatever type of representation that is chosen for the post-settlement governance entity, the iwi also need to clarify to the Trust Board how often you think those representatives should change. For example, you might want to change your Trust Board members yearly through marae or hapu AGM. You might want to keep trustees on for more than 1 year based on a rolling system of nominations, so that representatives do not change on an annual basis. Or, as some Trust Boards do, you might want to elect trustees who are permanently selected to the Trust Board. So that is a decision that people from the iwi need to make about the post-settlement governance entity. As well as representation, the iwi also need to clarify to the Trust Board how decisions should be made by the post-settlement governance entity. For example, decisions might be made at the marae or hapu level, and the trustees from that marae or hapu take those decisions back to the Trust Board or the post-settlement governance entity. Or decisions might be made on the advice of experts appointed to advise the post-settlement governance entity on all governance and management matters. Or within a regular meeting where each member has an equal vote and the chair a casting vote when necessary. So again, this is to reiterate, you, the people, need to advise the Trust Board, the current Trust Board, what kind of decision-making processes you think the post-settlement governance entity needs to adopt. Another important area that the people need to inform the Trust Board about your preferences is around how the post-settlement governance entity will distribute information back to iwi. For example, information about decisions could be disseminated to iwi after each post-settlement governance entity by posting out or putting online all of the minutes from each of the meetings. That, of course, has a high cost in terms of post if we have 2,000 or 3,000 people to post out minutes after each monthly meeting. Or, conversely, information about decisions could be disseminated to iwi members annually, like a number of iwi do with their annual reports. So that means only one post out a year, but it also means iwi get less timely information. Or information about decisions could be disseminated to iwi members as and when the post-settlement governance entity decides. So it may not be monthly and it may not be yearly, it might be a combination of those. Any combination of the above, for example, brief summaries after each meeting and an annual report and special notifications, might be the best way for the post-settlement governance entity to distribute information so that all iwi are informed about all decisions in a timely fashion. This then covers the bulk of the information that is briefly outlined in the handbook. What is most important is that these consultation hui allow the Trust Board to go out and meet as many of our people as possible, engage in a discussion about the decisions that the Trust Board has to make, get some direction from the people about how the Trust Board can move forward. It is most important, though, that you and your whānau know why and how to get involved in this process. These decisions will affect the future of our iwi and the assets and resources we can utilise to build our capacity for a brighter future for all of our tamariki and mokopuna. So I would urge everyone here and those of your whānau to ensure that you register, and you can do that online or by contacting the office and asking them to post you out a form. By attending the hui, you can make sure that your voice is heard, because all of the comments that you make are recorded and they do go back to the wider Trust Board and the wider community. I would urge every one of you to have your say on these decisions and to make sure that when the Trust Board moves forward, you have had an opportunity to have input not only into the decisions the Trust Board has to make, but also into the pathway forward for post-settlement. To reiterate, these are the contact details for our office. We have a free phone number, so you don't have to worry about the cost of ringing the office. We have management staff in the office who can take your calls and refer you on to appropriate people. We have the chair, David Manuel, and his email address and phone number here, and my contact details. I would strongly urge you all to participate and have a say in the pathway forward. We've now had a meeting with the Minister of Office Treaty Settlements. He has confirmed that he wants to renegotiate some matters for the iwi, that he is open to our thoughts about what can happen in the post-settlement phase. So this is an important and exciting time for Ngatikahu ki Whangaroa.